Hey everyone, uh, I wanted to make this podcast. I've been talking about doing one for many months now, but I just haven't gotten around it. And and by that I mean a video podcast. Mike Cuzzo and I, Peter, we've been talking about it, but we just don't get around to it. So I figure, like, hey, I might just as well go ahead and do one, and maybe it'll start some things, and hopefully you can get to see my cousin Peter's face sometime soon. If we do it together, he can do it. So I'm challenging you, Kasa. I'm challenging you. So to get off your what and do it. Yeah. Today is my birthday, so I figure what better way to spend it than to talk about something that it's really close to my heart, and that is meditation and Buddhist thinking. I feel like, especially in activist spaces, and the reason why I'm doing this is because a few years ago, I just came to the realization that healing and healing practices just was something that was often missing from activism circles, right? And we talk about making people angry and like getting people out on the street and protest, and like I don't know, like just be angry, and once you unlock that energy, you don't like have anything to like channel it or to process it. There's all this history with our people of trauma. So anyways, that's part of the intention. I can talk about it later on more on what that my journey was with that. So, but Buddhist meditation. For today, I wanted to cover the concept of faith, and I thought too that what a better way to start something like this than talking about something so central to why we do the things that we do. And I'm the same way. When I hear the word faith, I think blind faith. I think things that are like wishful thinking. It feels passive. It feels like waiting for something to happen. And I never consider faith as an active thing. And I've heard the words faith in action, but you add in action, right? And there's like faith. Well, why can't you can have an action without having faith, or can you? So these things have been on my mind a lot, and they've kind of reached a really loud point. Last year, I had a death in the family with an uncle of mine that passed away last year. I got the news on Thanksgiving Day, of all the days, so I had to fly over to Mexico and be with my family. He was really like a second father to me, and I feel like he's still around. He's part of me. I feel like he's one of my big guides as I look back and what I was able to learn from him, and so I offer that as an example of for me what faith looks like, and or at least a dimension of it, right? And some people might think like, oh, like that's we don't know like what's in the afterlife. We don't know like I don't know, whatever your theological stance is on believing in something, right? On something bigger than yourself. But that's a bigger question. But the question of faith, I don't think it has to be that like big. It can be very simple. And by faith I mean more like faith that transforms, and faith that actually drives you to change things in your life right now. Not like in the afterlife, although it could be part of it, it can be part of it, but primarily right now, in the now, in with with like real life and situations. And I was listening to this podcast by Mary Stankiewicz. I ran into. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing her name right, and I'm gonna link it on this video on the description so you can listen to the whole thing. And I'm also starting a curation of Dharma talks that I found interesting, particularly from people of color and other Buddhist Dharma talks, and from across the internet that I find interesting, but on my website. So I'll include a link on that on the video too. But yeah, Mary recently talked about faith, the concept of faith, right? And what a compelling role it plays in Buddhism. And it, again, it's not like faith in the sense of blind faith or passive hope, but rather is active, action-oriented, anchored in wise intention. Because intention, as she describes it, intention leads to action, action leads to habit, she said, habit leads to character, and character leads to destiny. And so you embrace action in faith, and I've heard it described in other ways. I was reading this book by, or rather I'm reading this book by Maria Nemeth called The Energy of Money, and she talks about authentic action as a different kind of action, as opposed to like when like we want to change things but we don't know what to do, so we're just like spinning around in our wheels. And so action that's not aligned with, she calls it, the standards of integrity and your life's intentions, it can be very it doesn't have the energy, concentrated energy, in order for something to really lift off. It's kind of like a rocket that launches, and so you might run out of fuel midway through. And so in order for that for your intentions that are exist in kind of like a metaphysical realm, your mind, to become reality, they need to be focused, and they need to be aligned with what feeds you and what will energize you and the practices that you have. And so and that's all part of the process of taking authentic action. And so yeah, and you take action not because someone said so, because somebody that claims to know it all said so, but because you are willing to see for yourself, and because you're willing to almost test things out with curiosity. And that's the part that, like, I feel having the concept of faith in that sense of curiosity, of like, let me try this out, let me try this other thing, that seems very different from what the concept of faith that at least I first had the understanding of just waiting for things to happen to you, rather than like you actually going out and moving forward and taking action to make things happen in a way that is wise. And yeah, so and by change, you can bring about change, but it's not a change that you're attached. Like, let's say you want to be attached to a change that's very specific, right? So you could one of your intention could be, oh, I want to find let's say a partner that I don't know, comes from this country, or like talks this way, or makes this amount of money. What if like the thing that you are actually, as you set into your journey, you find someone that's is more aligned with what your authentic self really wants, or rather of who what really aligns with your values, right? And so, or maybe you want I don't know, you want to travel somewhere, and or you want to buy a car, and then you want like that car to be like a specific color, right? This is like a very mundane example, obviously, but just to illustrate the point of an extreme, that being attached to an outcome is not what I'm talking about. It's more about setting on that journey, taking that steps on that road, so that you are traveling that journey with joy. It brings you joy because you're exploring now, little by little, the things that are really important to you authentically, rather than the things that have been distracting you. And so that's part of that faith process. So Mary describes faith also as an orientation, an inclination, and I'll go more into it. But she describes it as part of this, almost like a chariot that's drawn by five faculties. The first one is mindfulness. The second one is faith. The third one is wisdom. The fourth one is concentration, and the five is energy. And mindfulness, the first one, we're talking about awareness. In practicing being aware of our actions or things, we're talking about things that like maybe we haven't been willing to look at about ourselves, and being able to admit, hey, this is what's going on with me. Like in this situation, I tend to act like this, or there's these narratives in my head playing all the time, that might not necessarily be the entire truth. They might just be whatever. They might just be partial truths, or they just my interpretation of things, or maybe things that like where previously, I don't know, you swept under the rug, or like because of fear you weren't willing to look at and to admit. And so that's, and then also having compassion for yourself. Awareness comes with compassion, needs to be coupled with that awareness, with that mindfulness. They work together to embrace who you really are as a complete being. And I call that I like to think about an integration, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But the next one is faith. Then after mindfulness is faith, and meaning as a conviction, as an aspiration or inclination. And we're talking about like faith in the sense of, in order to, let's say you want to set out on a road, but before you set out on the road, you kind of need to turn towards it. And that's what faith does. That it's that turning towards, is that inclination towards that direction. And you set out forth. But it started with that, instead of like not phasing the road because of whatever fears or programming that we get from our upbringing or our society or whatever. We haven't really been phasing it. And so faith is that inclination, that leaning into it. So it makes sense when you hear people, some things like, lean into the faith, so it makes sense for me now, because it's as tied in this part of this structure. There's a, I don't know, it's easier for me to wrap my head around it. And then there's wisdom. So faith is accompanied by wisdom, in that you're balancing. That's what balances things. Balancing of seeing what's real and directing where to turn. So it's not just like turning like for the sake of turning, but it's actually turning towards what you really want to do, for, in other words, what's really important to you. What's your purpose in life? And by purpose, I mean, going back, tie it to what Maria Nemeth, of The Energy of Money, was talking about, which is, and she wrote another book called Life's Energies, I think it's called. And it's it's an extension of the concepts that she talked about, that, by the way, are also rooted. You find a lot of resonance with Buddhist concepts that she draws from. So they sound familiar is because they're very connected. But yeah, so essentially, wisdom is what, it's aligned with your standards of integrity. So your standards of integrity could be qualities that are qualities that you admire yourself or other people, like, for example, being courageous, being truthful, being loving, being strong, being visionary, things like that. And also they're aligned with your life's intention. So what's important to you, it's part of your purpose in this life. So like, and by not, and I don't mean like some like abstract thing, but like it can be very specific, like being a loving partner, being a loving family member, being a visionary leader, being a creator of beauty, being a successful artist, right? Like your life's intention. So that's where the wisdom comes in. So it's not just like faith to incline just anywhere, or being spiritually developing. That's the other important. I know it's been for me that I've started to find out as in the more that that I go into these practices, and by being spiritually developing, it has a very it's starting to have a very specific context for me, not in the sense of like you think of or others think of, but in my definition of it, and what works for me, and that's how it should be for each person, right? But anyways, so wisdom is what complements the faith here, and it's grounded in the real world. And then there's concentration, and that means the steadiness, the practices that help you to ground yourself so that you don't get distracted by the usual things that you've used to not embark on this road, like whether it is, watching TV, like doing, drinking, the habits, or like shopping, or like, overworking, or just being lazy, or they're all the same, there's not one worse or the other. It's just, and then they're part of what surrounds us as a human experience, right? And so it is a practice. Like I myself find myself, in that same boat of being distracted, but it really comes down to, it's easier if you surround yourself with things that will encourage you to be focused. And I don't like to use that word focus. I'm going to go back to what I said, integration. I like integration better, because integration means bringing in what you think you don't like about yourself and integrating to your full self, because there are aspects of those qualities that maybe they haven't been honed in a certain inclination, or they haven't been I don't know, they haven't been really explored by you in a different way that could actually be an asset to you. So again, I'm talking about integration into your fuller self, to bring your authentic self forward by using all of you. And there's actually even a practice called shadow work, in which you're willing to go into those things that you might have been ashamed of, or like to really look at them and work with those. But there's practices that help you to do that, like meditation, therapy, yoga, spiritual practice, if you go to church, support groups, in Buddhism you call it Sangha, community, and being able to talk about these things in a way that's healing and supportive. And it's not just one thing. Like for me, it's several things. Like I try to do Aztec danza. I do support groups. I started going to a queer men's group here in LA. I have meditation practice, and I go to groups, as well as I do yoga, and I love the trying to exercise. My nutrition, and this is not to say that like this is what everybody should do, but what I'm trying to say, I'm listing these things because it's not just one thing. I don't think it is one thing, because one thing is not going to help you. I think you have to surround yourself. The more that you surround yourself by the things and the practices of things that you want to achieve, and even like the people that you surround yourself with, the people that you talk to that have accomplished what you want to accomplish, talk to them, pick their brains, interact with them, instead of being distracted by either isolating yourself or distracting yourself with other things. So that's what we mean by concentration. And then there's energy, which is tied. It's also overlapping with concentration, the managing of energies, and that's the effort, that's the action, that's the authentic action that you take. And in order to take authentic action, you need to align it with your standards of integrity, your life's intentions, what's really important to you. But it doesn't have to be this big thing. It can be this simple. It actually should be a simple thing, because it's you take one step at a time, one little step. Maria Nemeth likes to talk about taken action that's with clarity, focus, ease, and grace. So meaning that it's a small action, it brings you joy, it should spark joy in you, and be so that can sustain you forward and your energies, so that you continue to generate that energy in you, even if it's not joyful all the time, or if it's not joyful but happy. You're able to tap into something that, because it's really important to you. So for example, if my life intention is to be spiritually developing and have that in my mind as a goal, or rather as the intention, and then I surround myself by all these practices that are going to sustain me when it gets really challenging, because it will, and we will get tested. um, that then we can, instead of being knocked over, we can stay longer in what we call it equanimity, which is that peace of mind. And then that peace of mind is not like you're a robot or like nothing affects you. You're still human. You're still gonna experience pain, very much so, but it's gonna be, you're gonna have a choice in how you want to focus or orient yourself, your attention, what you want to orient your attention towards. So anyways, I wanted to share that. I wanted to share the concept of faith. I just, it blew my mind when I heard, and I've been thinking a lot about it. And I used to think about the world as like in hope and fear dichotomies. And I was listening to these other podcasts, Buddhist podcasts, and I wish that I remembered and I would have saved it, but or I think it's Pema Chodron. I think it's her that also mentioned something about this, where um, hope and fear are the same. Is the same. They're two sides of the same coin, and they're like binary, and um, and we get caught into like these dichotomies, and that's why, you know, you could have fear, but then hope will come, and then hope, and then so back and forth. So kind of like we're talking about liberation from that. And so part of that liberation, what that can look like, is faith. But again, faith in a sense of action, and faith anchored in the five faculties. Mindfulness, that's part of these five faculties: mindfulness, faith, wisdom, concentration, and energy. And that to me feels like more concrete and more real and more powerful, really. And it does allow a kind of open the space to think about not just like what the physical reality is, but like what the energies around you are, and your state of mind and your state of being. So anyways, hope that this was helpful to people. And my intention with this is not to preach. Really, my intention is to I think that the reason why I took so long to do something like this is because there's something about like preaching and trying to teach others and to like move people to do, that it just sounds too exhausting for me. I rather have this as like a platform that where we share insights together, and it also keeps me motivated to continue in that path. So by talking, it goes back to that thing of like, if you surround yourself with the things, you're gonna become, the practice is gonna become easier, not easier, but like more part of like like what you go to in times when you run into those hard life situations, which will happen. Life is pain, and we live in it, but it's also joy, and being able to integrate all of that as human beings and being kind to ourselves is so critical. And that's stuff that like you don't really learn as an activist, unfortunately. And I think it should be really maybe the first thing that you learn, in my opinion. But hey, here we are. But yeah, so I'm hoping that yeah, leave your comments, and let's learn together. By doing this, please help me, because I want your help. We'll help each other. This is what I want. This is the intention that I set forth. Let's have a community where we support each other's practices, and we can have power together, rather than like anyone really being the leader, but being able to support each other. Thank you.